everyone, Alex Gray here, and welcome back to the International Classroom Podcast. Now, this December, it is the season of giving, so we're going to switch things up with something exciting. Conversations into the fascinating world of educational platforms. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to be showcasing 12 innovative platforms that are transforming education around the globe. From cutting-edge tools to ideas that are reshaping how we teach, you are going to get exclusive insights straight from the creators and visionaries behind these platforms. And of course, I've got a few extra surprises up my sleeve. So join me as we explore these technologies and discover how they are shaping education in our international classrooms. On to the episode. All right, are you a Thomas or a Tom? What do you prefer?
Thomas. I've had to adapt. I'm the fourth in a line of Thomas Thompsons. So we have a Tom, a Tommy, one's passed. But yeah, so we have to differentiate at the holidays. So
technically, are you Thomas Thompson IV?
Yes, Thomas Alfred Thompson IV. It's quite a redundant name, I suppose.
and do you all have the same middle name?
Yes.
Wow. Amazing. I'm super impressed by that. I just want to call you that. I want to Thomas Thompson IV. Welcome, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast. So it kind of brings out there must be the Englishness in me in terms of having that sort of lineage and gentry. It's I'm impressed.
We have the book with the family heraldry in it. I think that's probably a scam from those pop-up ancestry companies of like the 80s, but nice to have, I suppose.
Oh, definitely. Well, anyway, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast. Whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
Annapolis, Maryland, located between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore in that kind of metropolitan corridor there. We have St. John's, a great books college, the U.S. Naval Academy, some pretty good bookstores, coffee shop. Can't ask for much more.
Amazing. And you are here to talk about your educational platform today. So how would you like to introduce that to the listeners?
Yeah, EduAid AI is it's a workspace, really. It's not like an AI teaching assistant. It's a place where teachers can engage in high-quality, evidence-based instructional design using generative AI to, say, integrate all of the tools they may need in the course of doing that.
Amazing. So what inspired you to go from, I'm going to assume, being a teacher yourself to then create this AI platform to support teachers?
I mean, it really came from being in the classroom and recognizing challenges that I faced, and my co-founder, his name's also Thomas, that he faced as a science teacher. And really, it's a desire to answer a few basic questions we had. How do you build excellence in a field that struggles to retain talent? And what does it mean to retain talent and to onboard new teachers into the profession? And then 2, how do you close the gap between research and practice in education? Because there's a great literature base on the cognitive science of learning and learning sciences more broadly, yet a lot of that goes unyielded by many practicing teachers. And like the persistence of learning styles, for example, is one example of that. But really, it's those 2 questions that are the foundation of our application.
So you talk about gaps there. How does EduAid then go about closing the gaps?
Through process, really. It's not an affordance of the AI itself. It's the process of using the application to create logical sequences of instruction mediated by prior knowledge, providing opportunities for deliberate practice, building out schedules for interleaving in new context and new content through interleave practice distributed through time, in just kind of embedding these practices in the application itself and in the materials you create on the application, to the point such that the teacher's not really relying on AI-generated content. The AI is the means to an end. It's supplying teachers with the material to personalize and remix and revise to create something that is, I think, greater than the sum of its parts.
Fantastic. What's been the teacher feedback for this? Because like as soon as you start talking about evidence-based and the science of learning, like I'm interested in that. I know there's a lot of educators out there as well who are very passionate about evidence-informed and evidence-based practice. And as on the other hand, like you said, there's some that maybe know nothing about it. So having this platform at their disposal, what's been the type of feedback from teachers?
And there's the kind of basic user usage feedback around our UI and how that feels to use and what parts are intuitive and what parts aren't. Largely, the feedback has been positive in that regard. It seems pretty easy to set up and use on the platform without an extensive walkthrough or anything like that. Areas of improvement certainly our feedback bot, where we provide actionable step-by-step feedback on student writing, and providing a wider range of feedback reports and kind of personalization options for teachers. But outside of that, it's the feedback we hoped we would get. This is saving me time and enabling me to take a deeper dive on different areas where I may not have previously been able to, and consider new methods and techniques that I previously have not considered. Those are two outstanding pieces of feedback that we're pretty happy to get.
Fantastic. So you mentioned, you have to ignore my doorbell there, mentioned there about saving time. And that seems to be at the moment one of the big things we're talking about in terms of, is it effective and is it efficient in terms of things that we can kind of offload or automate through AI? In terms of that, what are the specific tasks that you've got the platform can do that helps with this automation and time saving?
So my background is in open educational resources, and the thing that people just was really beating a dead horse when it came to that, which was cost savings. Like OER will save us money. And it's like, of course it will. It's free. That's an affordance of being free. It'll save you money in your budget. Generative AI is the same thing, right? It can generate content very quickly. So I guess that can save you time. But what's really important is less the time saving and more of we compress the amount of time it takes to do any one thing. So drafting a lesson plan can now be quicker because you are, instead of moving from a place of pure creation, editing a document that gave you 3 or 4 strategies per section. So picking out things, right? So it's a matter of kind of narrowing your options instead of having to think very, very broadly and, lay out 5 or 6 options. So it's the process of using the application creates a lot of small efficiencies by, say, getting you objectives very quickly, or unpacking a standard and understanding, what student prior knowledge is necessary to access this objective or standard that you're teaching toward, and then being able to create scaffolding options around that. And then the nature of the text generation is that process is just pretty quick. So the idea is we're not saving teachers time to, say, go and think about their dinner reservations for that weekend, but rather they now have the ability to go deeper and differentiate instruction or create different versions of an activity at different reading levels, chunking text to meet different students' needs, things like this. So I don't like to think about it so much as a time saving. It's compressing the amount of time it takes to do any one task, freeing you up to do deeper tasks that were previously off limits due to time constraints.
Amazing. So let's take a deep dive into this then. If you're happy to walk us and talk us through the platform and how we can use it and how a teacher might use it on the day-to-day, that would be fantastic.
Let me share my screen here. Perfect. So once you sign into EduAid, this is the first screen that you will see, which is the content generator. Our site is organized across 2 dimensions. The first dimension is here on the left-hand side, the nav bar. Content generator is really all of the instructional design tools a teacher may use in the course of their day, from broad-based planning of instruction to the creation of information objects to present new material in different and varying ways, independent practice opportunities for students to engage in, cooperative learning, of course, mediated by student prior knowledge and ability, gamification of different aspects of review or the first glance at new material, questions, of course, the greatest tool in a teacher's arsenal, a variety of different types of questions with different ends in mind, and then the favorites tab where you can, of course, save your favorite resources and such. The assistant is broad-based administrative support, which is, say, outlining emails, perhaps drafting a announcement on your learning management system, accessibility around investigating different evidence-based interventions or drafting behavior intervention plans, wellness activities, and again, like I said, administrative support, the feedback tool, which is inputting a portion of student writing and then generating a actionable and specific, I guess positive ultimately is the voice we want to give it. Feedback report that is hopefully timely, because you're able to do this so quickly and get that back to your students, which is really kind of the crucial piece about feedback. And then the assessment builder tool and the chat. I'm not going to spend too much time on either one of these because we're kind of completely reworking them, and they will no longer be options on the left-hand side and kind of will get baked into the other aspects of the site. So let's look at this. The content generator is the most used tool, and I think it's our most powerful tool. The idea here is that we're kind of disguising layers of abstraction and complexity from the end user. The teacher can think less about interacting with an AI and understand that a lot of these interactions are now going to be couched in this kind of instructional language or these parameters of best practices, if you will. But you also don't want to blunt AI so much that it becomes less useful than, say, just going to a ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. So you need to walk this balance between putting on sufficient guardrails and ensuring that the information is accurate, limiting the amount of hallucinations that will pop up in responses, and then, of course, aligning it with what we understand about evidence-based practices in teaching and learning. One area here is the prompt itself, right? A poor prompt will typically result in a poor response. I was a US history teacher. Let's say I'm teaching about the, Federalist Papers, right? Very vague, but we'll get into standards-based instruction in just a moment. If you were to go on to ChatGPT and say, I want to create a lesson plan for the Federalist Papers, what you're going to get is an extremely generic response, very vague, and probably all not very useful. We have this enhance button feature, which will take those keywords and actually translate it into a learning objective. So instead of just going the Federalist Papers, we now couch that in. You will analyze the key arguments presented in the Federalist Papers to evaluate their impact on the development of the U.S. Constitution and principles of American government. Then that gets injected into a much more in-depth prompt structure, which will outline the specific processes that should be in the lesson plan and specific things that shouldn't be. For example, you want to limit mentions of like learning styles, for example, kind of like a myth in education that is very persistent. But let's hit add to workspace and see what we get here. And what you see is not a finished product, and that's by design. What you have is a document that provides you with a range of strategies across different domains. First are different learning objectives aligned to different levels, as laid out in like Bloom's taxonomy or Marzano's taxonomy. We use two different ones depending on the specific resource at hand. Or always include prior knowledge measures. That is something that is always included in a lesson seed created on EduAid. So if a student is going to be able to analyze the key arguments presented in the Federalist Papers, they should, one, have a basic understanding of the U.S. Constitution, two, have a familiarity with the concepts of federalism and republicanism, and three, understand who these historical figures writing the Federalist Papers were. Then what you could do on EduAid is say, take that basic knowledge, you could throw it into this topic and keyword box here, and you could say, okay, prior knowledge and scaffolding. I lay out what declarative, procedural, and conceptual knowledge students should have in relation to these concepts, and then provide you with scaffolding options to then go about working through that declarative, procedural, or conceptual knowledge. And then we have this suggested area, which will then pair a resource to that document that you just created. Say, hey, it would be logical for you to go here next, right? So maybe you want to outline a slideshow or do something around inclusive strategies. Maybe from this lesson seed, you want to do a think, pair, share as your cue set to introduce the topic. So let's hit that. And then that same objective and we're calling these areas cards, right? So they can collapse and reordered, so you can create that sequence and then you can kind of export the things out together. But the idea is you create a logical sequence of instruction. If you look at something from like the Deans of Impact report on the science of learning, they rate that very highly, like the deliberate, sensible sequence of instruction. And we would be surprised how often that kind of goes wrong in curriculum pacing guides, where you're jumping from content and context without much consistency or kind of deliberate building of student prior knowledge to those objectives. happy to answer any questions so far that you may have, but this is giving
I'm
you
just
kind of
taking,
the basic sense.
no, I'm taking everything in. It makes perfect sense to me. We talk about logical flow and logical sequencing, and the fact, obviously, when you're showcasing so much understanding of the science of learning. I'm curious in terms of, obviously, where it's pulling this information from, like in terms of what have you uploaded in terms of, is it specific research papers it's giving? Is it particular work that's been done in terms of, educational or evidence-based learning? And just obviously in terms of like whose work potentially, or they keep maintaining accuracies and approaches of obviously what we're seeing there, like the declarative, procedural and conceptual understanding being one of them. It's not something a day-to-day AI pulls out.
No, that is correct. So a lot of this is, I think, clever prompt engineering. That's a big piece of this. And that just goes through just consistent testing and just kind of flipping the switches, turning the dials, just tuning in different parts of our language of what we're highlighting. Because ultimately what the AI does not have is an understanding of meaning in the way that we do, right? It's a separate kind of, I guess, processing of information. So I'll just talk you through this for a second. So this will be, like I said, all about hiding layers of abstraction from the end user so they don't have to think about a lot of these details and focus more on the instructional side of using AI. So that means, of course, you need to refine prompts. And refining your prompts, there's a couple of ways you can do this. But some interesting research papers are showing that large language models actually outperform humans in prompt optimization. So you'll end up using a large language model to optimize the prompts that you're using for a large language model. So there's these kind of two layers where you have AI systems speaking to each other. We'll also use a method called retrieval augmented generation, which is where you provide the large language models with specific documents, PDFs, or other files that you want it to weigh more heavily in its training set. We kind of have like this broad corpus of literature that we pull. So we do these kind of persistent literature reviews where we're looking at really like the papers that summarize the literature base. So systematic literature reviews, meta-analyses. These are particularly useful because they highlight kind of emerging, I guess, principles or mental models regarding instruction that is far more useful than, say, like giving the AI a bunch of papers with just clogged up with research methods and things like that. It doesn't really need that in its context set. So we'll scrub those papers and focus really on findings, on discussion, and on those parts of the papers that will be most actionable for the AI when generating the materials on our site. So this might be, we have like a literature set on direct instruction, for example. And that's going to ground our script such that it will always follow these few specific kind of steps. Now, we want to avoid, here's a great text right here by Paul Kirshner and Carl Hendrick, How Learning Happens, right? Great collection of papers. And what they're going to highlight in the last section of the book, when they're talking about misconceptions and misunderstandings, is that like you use these evidence-based principles as kind of a checklist. And you want to avoid that ultimately because your context will vary from class to class and the specific needs of specific students will be different and not so easily applicable. But we, at the same time, understand that there are some general practices that are broadly useful, which is indirect instruction. You want to focus in some way of activating student background knowledge regarding the task at hand. Modeling or thinking aloud, so you kind of show what it seems like to apply this. So let me show you how to analyze the arguments made in the Federalist Papers. So what this is prompting you to do is read, say, a few first few paragraphs of Federalist number 10 out loud, and then discussing the dangers of factions as being described in this particular essay. So you're kind of modeling what it is to dive into this historical document and discuss the arguments being made, the bias of the author, sourcing, etc. Then looking at like examples and non-examples as presented, and then soliciting student responses and feedback, then opening it up for a practice opportunity, and then having check-in questions, right? So these aren't the finished scripts, but it's giving you the headings and the kind of starting place to then say, go into EduAid and create some of the other resources to complement this.
Yeah.
We limit AI hallucinations by making it very granular. Everything is really small. It's not going to be a finished product in every single prompt, because the more we ask the AI to do, the more complexity we add, say a 12-step task or something like this. It seems to us that we're just inviting in more opportunities for hallucinations and for things to go wrong. And then also, when you use this modular system, you're giving teachers the freedom to kind of take the pieces that they want and leave the pieces that they don't need. So you're not following this kind of checklist format that Paul Kirshner was warning us all to avoid when it comes to evidence-based practice. So you can kind of pick and choose, rearrange, revise, and remix different parts to create a sequence that is right for you.
It's amazing. I'm taking it all in, kind of reading it through in terms of what it's go there. So, and these are the things that I'm noticing from this in terms of, do you call it, what were they, the blocks or the tabs you have on that right-hand side? What do you refer to them as?
We call them cards.
Cards, sorry. So you're saying obviously these cards are audible, but you can move around sort of that top left side where you're going from direct instruction to assess, what have we got then? Assessment, cooperative learning, and it builds on top of then the previous card. So there's a continuation of, which is great. So
exactly.
And this is just from what I'm seeing. So if I'm talking about constructing a lesson, as it were, and how the flow goes in terms of the input, the check-ins for understandings, and all these different things that flow through, it looks very, like, first impressions is very robust in terms of, like, just looking at the content that's coming out from it, and the examples, the ideas. So it's not a fully fledged lesson per se, it's the ideations, it's ideas of tasks that teachers can go and do based on, say, the evidence-informed approach, which is, I'm really, really impressed with it. It's one thing for me as a teacher interested in pedagogy and approach, and not having AI do everything for me, but working as an assistant for me, because I still need to have an understanding of my craft. I think that's a key imperative that we kind of stick with this. This is just going to help and speed things up and help educators who don't have access to the pedagogical or the evidence-informed, or who maybe haven't been trained in that way or don't know a lot about it, to get there. But I am interested in the feedback bot. And the reason why I'm interested in this one is simply because obviously there's things come out today from the DFE, which is an English-based, and obviously we're here in America, or obviously you're in America going through there, but I'm sure you will talk about whether you go for IBs or whether you're going GCSE, A levels, and aspirations to move over to an international side. But the DFE posted that students' work should not be used to train, without consent, should not be used to train AI models, which I'm sure as a founder there, you're probably ethically, I agree with that. So what do you do with the data? So if I was to provide something for the feedback bot, whether it was an image or something from a student's work or something that had, a name on it per se, what are you doing with the data and information that gets entered into the system?
So I, just for context for folks who are listening, I went ahead and created an essay revision activity. So what this is I have the AI generate a faulty essay with a bunch of problems, and it provides the students with a rubric to go ahead and correct it. The reason for doing that is I wanted to have us an example text to put into the feedback bot. So we threw that text into the feedback bot, and I created semantic feedback, which is going to get into some of the deeper mechanics of writing. And what this does is it lays out the argumentation quality from the claim, the grounds, the warrant, the backing, the qualifier, the rebuttal given in the student's argument. It rates it, ultimately provides the student with actionable steps to improve their argument, et cetera, et cetera. So pretty robust feedback report on reasoning and logical structure in the student's writing. What you'll notice immediately, though, is you see how I can edit the title here on this, but I can't do it over here.
Yeah.
And there's no options for transform or really editing on this until I open it. The idea is that once I hit close on that, I'll go to my generation history. There's no feedback report there. Once you leave the feedback bot and you close out your feedback reports, that data is gone. You can't access it again on our site, and it's not retained by our AI providers for any model training or anything like that. It is perpetuated in our database for 30 days for just like general fraud prevention measures and seeing people like spamming our system with different kinds of crazy requests or things like that. But ultimately, anything entered on our feedback report is not used for training models. It's not shared with any other third-party providers or like for advertising or anything like that. It's very much a kind of a closed loop where you enter the student work sample that gets injected into the broader prompt structure regarding what the feedback should look like. That response, it goes through our content moderation endpoint to ensure that what we're asking for is not going to be harmful in any kind of way, bias. There's like 4 or 5 areas that we moderate across, which is hate speech, bias, violent calls for violence, self-harm, sexuality, some other area. Sorry, I don't have that at hand, but we put it through the content moderation endpoint. And then the response, once the feedback is streamed back to the user, that connection is severed. And then the feedback is yours to, say, send to the student. And then once you leave it in EduAid, you can't access it again. We figured this is the one area where you're most likely to have a bleed through of personally identifiable information, because the rest of the application is very much removed from specific student data. It's all focused on kind of the objectives, the topics, and then couching that in a broader kind of instructional design language. So yeah, the only area, the feedback bot, where you could feasibly put in student information is pretty much our area of we don't track much on the site to begin with, but it's our area of like the least amount of tracking in regards to how you're interacting with our feedback.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for answering that for me. One thing that did catch my eye on the generator is gamification. And obviously that game-based learning, gamification is, it's been at the forefront, but obviously it did get to one point where it became a bit of a buzzword.
It is.
However, those people who know it and those people who I think use it effectively know the power of being able to make things that have an element of, I think, competitiveness or game to it, and how students will benefit from that type of learning. So this I'm really interested in. This I'm so curious to see how this part works and the types of things it can produce for students. If you'd be happy to take us through.
Yeah, so I'm not the happiest with our gamification, game-based learning divide, because we don't really nail that on the site. We call a lot of things that are game-based learning, we put that under the gamification tab, which people who know it are definitely cringing when I say that. Put out a whole blog post about the difference between gamified and game-based instruction and kind of go into best practices for that. But take a look at Walden and on civil disobedience. So 2 great texts from Henry David Thoreau. Sure, we'll enhance it just to show that feature again. I just put in Walden and civil disobedience, and that then picked up and said they will analyze the themes of individual conscience and social responsibility presented in Thoreau's Walden and on civil disobedience, and explore how these concepts relate to contemporary issues of justice and civic engagement. It's a great objective. Jeopardy-style is just what it looks like, your typical kind of Jeopardy review game board. It'll create the categories, it will create the sections, and it will hide the questions behind each section in those categories. You could then, go in and edit each line. You could say, and this is where you can start entering in like layers of complexity from our site. So you go to, say, chat and say, here's a game-based review, but I want, let's say, questions to debrief afterwards. Just plug that in. We have some debrief questions related to like the 4 or 5 main areas that we want to focus on. And then, hey, you can add that right back into the workspace. So now these 2 areas kind of speak to each other. So your chat history is not relegated to the chat-based format in that conversation with you and the AI, but now you can bring that into the actual workspace itself and build that on top of your existing materials.
And if I want to export that, is it easy enough to do? Does it come out in a certain format?
So we don't have many formal integrations in place. That's something that we're working on presently. But just to give you a sense of how you can do this, everything is in markdown format in the cards. And then when you hit copy, that translates it to HTML, which is a broadly pastable language, right? And then you just go to your preferred document format, copy, paste, and then the formatting gets locked, so everything you did doesn't get lost. Now, it made the lines of the chart white instead of dark, but that's just a simple matter to fix, right? I just go into chart options. I'll put 1 point. There we go. Now I have my table again. You can drag that around. You could put it in, you say, PowerPoint as well. But it's pretty easy to export what we have, because we just kind of put in, what have I been calling it? I've been calling it our dumb export, which is like, it's the lowest common denominator way to export something, but it generally works. Or in this case, it gets really big because I put these debrief questions on, but you just get rid of the debrief questions and then you're good to go.
I mean, obviously, we've taken language here. And obviously, as we know, the large language models does what it says on the tin. If I was maths, like I'm a science teacher, but if I was looking at physics perspectives and I wanted formulas or, and maybe that it doesn't do it now, but maybe it's something like that in terms of graphs or something along those lines. Is that something it does at the moment or something that you were thinking about maybe allowing it to do in the future?
So, I mean, you're correct in your assumption there that large language models very much struggle to do basic mathematics and often do it wrong. But this might be a good time to show another feature, which is our standard search tool. So let's say I'm teaching mathematics in the US. We have our Common Core standards related to mathematics. So we can say, hey, do this Common Core math standard, which lays out some examples. And the options we do have, like formally, say, editing equations, definitely an area for improvement for us. We've looked at integrations with organizations like Wolfram that have a great computational engine to do math generation and math problem creation. But to give you just a sense of this, it'll be things like real world examples, which are going to couch that equation or that math concept in it's like a word-based problem, or because we know AIs can do assignments with mistakes, right? They're going to have several problems that are going to have a piece of incorrect work, and then it's going to give you the questions to go about evaluating where that problem went, diagnosing the issue, and then solving the math problem correctly. So we played to the fact that it doesn't quite do it perfectly well as the basis for an assessment saying, hey, it's not going to get this part well. Here's where it won't. Can you diagnose exactly what that problem is and then solve it correctly yourself, right? So there's some, let's call them AI-enabled math assignments, right? Which is a very nice way of saying, hey, AI can't do math very well across the board and generally has a high rate of failure. So let's lean into that and create assignments that would benefit from that unique affordance or bug, if you will. But then we also have some basic things where we'll take those kind of examples from the standard-based language that will give us problem sets and do this kind of in-context learning where it's like, hey, it's this, and this is the answer, and it provide the AI with 3 or 4 examples of it to increase the likelihood of a correct response. But math is certainly an area of improvement that we are working on. It's starting with just basic having a better way of showing the equations, right? Because it's doing it in natural language as opposed to putting it in a format where you can say edit it and not have fraction 1/4 and just write 1/4 as a fraction. Yeah. So definitely an area of improvement. My apologies to the math teachers of the world. We would like to do more to assist. We have some areas where we think it would be effective, like still this broad-based planning stuff is rather useful for math teachers. Part of the reason why we have like our free program, as opposed to just being like, hey, you have to pay for it to use it at all, is because we want the math teachers who may use it just to sketch out a lesson plan or come up with some assessment measures or unpack a state or national standard. You have the tools to do that.
And you mentioned something there, because if people have watched this all the way through, they're probably like myself, like, hey, this looks really cool. This looks really, really helpful in terms of planning, and learning about evidence-based approaches and all these different pedagogical information. There's obviously all of this tied into it. And they're going to go, but what's the cost? Like, because it looks too good to be free. There's a simple way. It looks too good to be free. Like, what is the cost? What are we going to get if we go for a free one versus a paid for one?
So again, like I said, my background is in open educational resources, and I view things like teachers pay teachers to be kind of this, I don't want to say abomination on education, but like kind of just counter to what this stands for. If we consider education to be a public good and a fundamental human right, the tools to support that should be just as open and just as free as the education itself. So we have our scholarship program where folks who reach out to us and say, hey, I can't afford this, we grant 100% of those requests with free access to EduAid. We have a free version of the application. The only thing that limits you is the number of total requests that you can make. So that's limited at 15 a month, which I think is probably pretty low. I would like to maybe expand that a little bit, but we pair that with a really low price point, which is $5.99 a month or $49.99 for a year subscription. Ultimately, high costs for tech platforms tends to support bloated marketing budgets and like sales initiatives and things like this. We're a really small bootstrap team, so we're not trying to say return money back to our investors, nor are we paying for a large marketing budget. We mainly focus on designing a useful tool for teachers, and the cost of AI generation is pretty low currently. It's actually cheaper for us to run the model today than it was when we first launched in March of last year. The models have gotten better and they have gotten cheaper. That enables us to keep this pretty low price point. And we haven't had to say up it over the last year, right? It's been perfectly sustainable for us and our small team. So we believe AI can change the nature of a lot of educational technology companies and how they operate and the margins they need to do in order to be sustainable. I think you can have a lot more of these smaller organizations that have really interesting niche products that are priced pretty low because information is cheaper than it ever was before.
So you mentioned in there about obviously the improvement of quality, and obviously over what is a year, the standard of the output of the standard from AI models is just greatly increased. Now, obviously, there's teachers out there who have yet to start using AI, and obviously are looking at it going, it just keeps changing, it keeps evolving, it keeps getting different. There's always something new. Someone else is talking about this, and the overwhelming part, the fear part that's still there. What advice would you be giving to these educators who are just about to get started and sort of dip their toe into the using AI in their teaching?
Yeah, I would say one, that some level of fear and skepticism is totally warranted. We've, as educators, have been burned by educational technologies before, right? Speedy adoptions without great, say, professional development around it. So we end up having these fancy, nice, shiny tech tools, but really no skill in deploying them in the classroom effectively. Like, we want to avoid that. That clearly is the negative outcome. I think of the smart boards that my school had that were just kind of collecting dust in the background because we're just going to use this as a whiteboard and we don't really need to have the interactive elements. So that's certainly a concern. Here's the advice I would give. One, yes, the AI ecosystem is rapidly developing. There's always new model announcements and small gains made by the foundational models, right? And new model announcements, but the foundational constraints still remain. And I think it's important to have a better understanding of what these technologies are and understand the constraints of the technologies so that you can, I guess, better adopt them in your classroom. And that would be the following, really, which is that you have to understand, regardless of ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Llama, whatever the model is, at the end of the day, a large language model is a pattern prediction system that processes text using statistical relationships that were learned from vast amounts of human written content. And what that really means is that it's predicting the likely sequence of words based on its training data. And that's why, I kind of take issue with terms like hallucinations, right? That term is a stand-in for when the AI gets something incorrect. And we kind of link that term with a state of mind, of a psychological condition, which I think kind of anthropomorphizes the AI system in a way that we really shouldn't. A hallucination is not a bug, for example. It's a feature of the system itself. This is due to the fact that an AI lacks a sense of meaning in the way that we have meaning when thinking about language. Its conception of language is based on statistical probability. So a hallucination is a statistically accurate use of a word or phrase that is also factually incorrect, which is a strange concept to wrap your head around. A word or phrase that is statistically accurate but factually incorrect. And that's now kind of a reality that we have to deal with given the nature of how language models interact with language. A great paper to read. Riccardi is the lead author. There were two other authors whose names I'm blanking on right now. It's called the two-word test, which is a semantic benchmarking test for AI systems. What this test did is it provided different large language models, GPT 3.5, GPT 4, Claude, and I think and Gemini, sorry, with a series of noun combinations like baby boy, goat sky, like just different word combinations ranging from meaningful to utterly meaningless, and asked an AI to rank it on that scale, 0 being totally meaningless, 4 being totally meaningful. And what we found is that humans, is that humans outperformed AI on this test, and AIs had high rates of error. 3.5 Turbo, GPT 3.5, for example, no longer really used publicly. It had like a 59% failure rate on this task. So it's like, well, what does that tell us? That tells us that AIs lack a real sense of meaning in statements really whatsoever. They don't truly understand meaning in a way that humans do. They don't have an embodied experience of the world or interactions in a social atmosphere. They're, again, just making sophisticated statistical predictions about what word combinations are likely to appear together given its vast training set of human writing. That's a lot, but that's kind of a core foundational constraint that has been with every large language model from GPT-3 to GPT-4 to 4.0 to the newest line of Claude models. And no matter how sophisticated these models are at their statistical projections of language, that is just what they are. So you're never going to get over that foundational meaning hurdle with the present architecture of the systems. That doesn't really seem to be changing. And if you understand that foundational constraint, and it's a lot to wrap your head around, you kind of have a general understanding of what affordances these models could have and what the clear boundaries are.
Fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of information there, a lot of it to really digest and make sense of, isn't it? But it shows, I think, that, and this is one of the things, when we look at the models, and you will get this, you'll get the skeptics, you will get there's a lot of AI platforms out there. There's a lot of just wrappers out there. There's a lot of, that are developed by quick businesses who don't have a clear either one understanding of the product itself in terms of how the AI seems to work, but secondly then don't have an understanding of what teachers want and what actually it means to teach. And I think from my side, what you've shown me there just from listening is, first of all, I've clearly seen that the approach of EduAid is based around a real depth of knowledge of educational practice and evidence-informed educational practice. And that's evident with the output of the lesson that we made there. And then just listening to you here as well in terms of approaches and understanding AI, the hazards, the ethics, and obviously the understanding part of it shows that you've kind of got both those two things, ticked off to some extent, and that you understand teaching, you understand best practice, and that your understanding of AI and how it works and the pros and cons of it is pretty much there. So, as a platform coming together and really just looking behind the curtain in this mini series of the people behind it, the people who are making it, who are running it. There's a lot of good. You got a lot of good things going on. A lot of good things going on there.
Lots of room for improvement as well. I wouldn't say we have either one of those areas completely down, right? It's like the known knowns, things we know, but there's a lot of those known unknowns. There's a lot of stuff we know that we do not know. And designing around that seems to kind of be vitally important to us, which is you don't want to step over into an area where we're now asking the AI to do something outside of its range of affordances, which is why our math offerings, for example, are so limited. It's like I don't want to go out and throw out a bunch of math resources that are just going to be faulty across the board, because that would just be counterintuitive to everything we stand for.
Yeah. to wrap this up, and again, I really appreciate if you've taken us through this package and showcasing and sharing it with us. It's a really good thing. There's going to be people out there who are intrigued and interested to learn more about EduAid AI. How can they best get involved and learn more about the platform?
I mean, the site itself is pretty useful, like not even on the platform. We have the EduAid Academy, which lays out just general workflows and best practices. You'll notice there's no like certificate that goes with that. It's just knowledge that you can pick up and be better at this thing. We don't really try to turn teachers into our free marketers. It just feels like not very much what we stand for on that. Our blog as well, like we're always kind of putting out content, not just about the platform, but just some other kind of high level information regarding evidence-based practice and, you know, what it means to gamify instruction or something like that. And then social medias at EduAid.ai on X, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, all the other places. And we update that pretty regularly. I mean, I suck at social media, and like I said, we're a small team, so like it's not so much. It's not a lot of like marketing content, for example. It's just some platform updates, walkthroughs, that kind of stuff. Just want teachers to be effective at what they do, so we just try to provide resources to support that.
Amazing. Well, you're doing an amazing job, a fantastic job. And again, the platform looks, as I say, in the showcase from there is I'm very impressed. It's very cool. I'm going to go and have a play with it myself as well. And I've got a teacher friend who is hugely into evidence-based research, like books and write things out about different approaches. And I can send it to her and she will be very, very happy. I know this for a fact. So Thomas Alfred Thompson IV, if I remember that correctly.
That is correct.
Been an absolute pleasure having you on the International Classroom Podcast today. Really, really appreciate you coming on and showcasing and sharing the EduAid AI platform and teaching us all about it. So, yeah, wonderful speaking with you. Thank you ever so much.
Well, thank you for the invite. This was wonderful, and I appreciate the opportunity.